Should go ahead then.
The yellow bit might be all that's left.
Oh no, that would be Poland.
Oh my god, yeah. Could be.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to our Ukraine conference in Durham today. I'm very pleased to have these three renowned speakers today with us, and I'm also glad you all made it on Friday afternoon, which is, I believe, quite a busy day otherwise. First of all, I would like to thank two organizations for helping us with this conference. The first of us is PP Society of Durham, which provided, oh please come in. And secondly, European Students for Liberty, which provided us with funding, and they'll have leaflets and books around, so feel free to take them if you are interested. Our first speaker is going to be Thomas Urban, a prominent journalist who spent 22 years in Eastern Europe, in Moscow, Warsaw, and Kiev. Has experience from New York and major AP agencies in France and elsewhere. Is currently the head of Süddeutsche Zeitung office in Madrid, and we are very, very, very happy to have him here. He will start with more general introduction of Ukraine and of the crisis which is happening there, how the Ukrainian nation existed throughout history, and he's definitely more than competent to deliver this talk. And he's published many books on the history of Ukraine, on Russian literature, and also his latest book on Russian literature was just published 1 month ago in Russian. Might be of your interest. So without further ado, please let me introduce Dr. Thomas Urban.
So, who would have thought 1 year ago or 2 years ago that there will be a war in Europe? The question is, do we have a war now? And if it is a war, which is now in this region, who is fighting in this war? I will pose some questions. I don't have answers to all the questions, and might be, hopefully, we can provoke a debate, a discussion. Is Ukraine is a new European country, as you know, after the collapse of Soviet Union in '91. In this period exactly, I was correspondent in Moscow, so I was witness of the collapse and of the state building of the new republics, which were former Soviet republics. The collapse of the Soviet Union, as you know, in the end of '91 happened without any war, without any military confrontation. It was finally an administration act. The leaders of 3 Soviet republics, the Russian Federation, Soviet Ukraine, Soviet White Russia, decided that they want to go out of Soviet Union in December '91, and this was the end of Soviet Union. And we had among these 15 former Soviet republics, the majority with no statal experience, with no statal past. And one of these new republics without any statal history is Ukraine. There was no Ukrainian independent state in modern times before. It just happened in the end of '91. And the society, the political administration, nobody was prepared. The economy was not prepared. I remember my first conversation with the new Ukrainian Minister of Finances. He told me, in '92, he told me in Kiev, our conception is very clear. Our money must be always 10% better than the ruble. So we won't have problems with the Russians. That means our soldiers will earn better than the Russian soldiers, because all of them came out of the Soviet army. With the collapse of the Soviet army, as you know, also the Soviet Union, also a big army had to be divided. It was especially a very complicated problem with the Ukraine, because in Ukraine were based atomic weapons, and Ukraine was the place of production of nuclear weapons. How this problem was resolved? Because it was in the interest of the international community to concentrate, to control nuclear atomic weapons. So the Russian Federation, Moscow, and the new Ukrainian state signed a treaty, a memorandum in Budapest, together with Great Britain, the United Kingdom, and with the United States. And this memorandum is important in the context of today, of 2014. Why? This memorandum of Budapest said the new Ukrainian army, the new Ukrainian state, gives their atomic weapon to Russia, and Russia, United States of America, and United Kingdom together guarantee the franchise of the new Ukrainian state. These franchises you see here, which were a very complicated history. This is now the western part of Ukraine for 3 centuries was Polish, Austrian, between the two world wars once more Polish, and became Soviet, became the first time in history under control of Moscow in the end of 39, that means in the beginning of World War II, till the Germans attacked Soviet Union, as you know, in June 41. And after the defeat of the Germans, this western part of Ukraine, which before the war was Polish, did not go back to Poland. It stayed with Soviet Union. It was more than a simple administration act. It was a very dark and very tragic history which dominates till today the collective conscience in Ukraine, and which is also a very important moment in the today debates about the Ukrainian problem, the Ukrainian conflict of today. Why? As I told you, in 39, this was Polish, you say Poland. In 39, the Germans attacked Poland from the west, and the Red Army, with the High Commander Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin, went in from the east 17 days later, and they divided Poland. The Germans took the biggest part of Poland in 39 in autumn, and the Soviet Union took this part, which is now yellow, the former eastern regions of Poland, with the one big city, it's the city of Lviv today, which is situated here. Lviv, former in Austrian and in German, the city of Lemberg. What happened to this region? In the same moment as the Germans organized general terror to the Polish population, also the new Soviet administration organized a regime of terror to the local population. The local population of this region were Poles. The Poles had to go after the end of World War II in 45, 46. They were expelled to the west, to the region to the Polish territory of today. What happened to the Ukrainian people? Because the Ukrainians in this region, though it was the Polish state before World War II, were in the majority, or they were not in the majority, but it was the biggest group in this region. It was they were confronted with a regime of terror, with the Stalinist regime, which meant deportation of the local Ukrainian elite to Siberia, to Russian labor camps, and so on, to Soviet labor camps. And the same thing happened. The same regime of terror, of Soviet terror, was reinstalled, especially in this region, after World War II. That means in the collective conscience of this region, of a big part of this population, World War II meant, of course, German occupation, but before German occupation and immediately after German occupation, the collective experience is the regime of Stalinist terror. If you go to eastern Ukraine, the Germans occupied nearly the whole Ukrainian territory of today. Eastern Ukraine had a completely different experience. The Germans organized terror, not only for, the Germans did not kill only the Jews, the Germans also deported Russians, Ukrainians, and so on. So the Red Army came in and liberated. It was for the people, it was a liberation by Red Army, by the Soviet Red Army. But when the Soviet Red Army came in these regions, people took it after a second occupation, after the German occupation, might be even a worse occupation. The German occupation of this region, former Eastern Poland, had two aspects. The Germans tried to murder all the Jews. It was the center of Jewish population in Europe, was this region. But the Germans tried to establish a regime of collaborators, of Ukrainian collaborators. And the Ukrainians who lived in this region, in today Western Ukraine, they had a horrible choice. They had the choice to be collaborators with the Germans to survive, or to go to a concentration camp. So, but in the collective conscience of the Eastern Ukrainians and also of the Russians, Moscow, they were collaborators and fascists. And you have in the today the debate, this argument is repeated. This is the Western Ukraine is a fascist society. I don't agree with this. You had collaboration in every country in which the occupants, the Germans in this case, allowed collaboration. For instance, the Germans were not interested in collaboration in Poland. They were not interested in organizing a Muppet regime in Warsaw during occupation. Therefore, there was no official occupation. But in these countries where the Germans wanted to have a Muppet regime, there were occupation in every country. Czechoslovakia and France, in Belgium, in the Netherlands, in Norway, in every country. So we have two completely different ideas of the history of 20th century in Eastern Ukraine and Western Ukraine. Here, when the Germans went in 41, when the Germans attacked Soviet Union, when Hitler broke the treaty with Stalin, the famous Ribbentrop-Molotov treaty, most of the people, not the Jews were murdered by the Germans, but the Ukrainian people waited for the German tanks with flowers. After 1.5 year experience of Stalinist terror, when their elite were deported by Stalin's secret police, and when their churches were shut, and when their priests were killed by the Soviet secret police in 39 till summer 41. So they were in this region especially. I think it's the most tragic region in 20th century history of Europe, If you might be know the title of a book of American historian Tim Snyder, and he called this region the Bloodlands, because during World War II the front went over this region, some regions, 4 times. So you have different views inside Ukraine concerning World War II. Now, what's about language? Is it the conflict of today inside Ukraine, is it a language problem? The western region talk Ukrainian. The eastern region, Crimea, the region of Odessa, they talk Russian. Is it a language and a cultural problem, the conflict in Ukraine today? My answer is very clear. It's not a language problem. It's not a cultural problem. Why? The center, Kiev, the majority of Kiev and the majority of Central Ukraine speaks Russian. But they are in the same political alliance like Western Ukraine, who don't speak Russian. So the culture is not a problem. It's also interesting for the debate of today, because in the beginning of the war, or of the military confrontation, there was one argument that the new Ukraine government, which was installed after the conflict, the fightings on the Maidan 1 year ago, will forbid Russian language. It was a big argument in all the international news. And it was an argument by the government in Moscow. But the argument is not true. There was a problem with the language, a law of language, but it was not the idea that this law should forbid Russian language. This law had one formal mistake. There was one formal